Welcome to Journals of Self-Discovery. Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I have one announcement before we get started, and that is that the TAT Foundation Press has just released Awake at the Wheel, Norio Kushi's Highway Adventures and the Unmasking of the Phantom Self. You might remember that Norio was a guest on this podcast, so I definitely recommend the book. You can read more about it and other books at tatpress.org. And if you like Norio's book or any of the books at TAT Press, please leave a review on Amazon. You might not know it, but you can do that even if you didn't buy the book on Amazon, and it really does help with sales. So now for our show. I have both a guest and a topic this month. My guest is Michael Casari, and he's here to talk about Richard Rose. Michael was a longtime student of Rose's and will give you a feel for both the man and his message. And be sure to listen until the very end of this interview, as Michael will also read some poems from Rose's book, Caroline. Enjoy. Well, first thing I want to do is just thank you, Michael, for taking the time out of your day to do this interview with me. I certainly appreciate it.
I appreciate you asking me because Mr. Rose was a very instrumental person in my life and probably kept me alive this long. Had I not met him, I doubt that I would be here. So to get a chance to reminisce and talk about him is very important, and I do appreciate you asking me.
And I'll definitely be asking you about your first encounter with Richard Rose, but to sort of set the stage for that, can you paint a little bit of a picture of prior to meeting Richard Rose, what your interests were, or what your state of mind was at that point in time?
First of all, I don't think, maybe like a lot of people back then, this was 1972 or early 73 that I met Rose. I was a burned out hippie. My life was going nowhere. I dropped out of college at KSU, Kent State University. After 3 years, I dropped out the first term of my senior year. I was basically a wreck. I was a psychological wreck. And I had driven out to the West Coast not too long before I met Rose. Somebody gave me Arthur Janov's Primal Scream. And prior to that time, I'd been to see every counselor, priest, at least a half a dozen different service providers in the Canton, Ohio. I was born in Canton. And one night in a bar, somebody gave me Arthur Janov's Primal Scream, and about 2 days later, I quit. I was working. I was able to work, but I got in my van. I quit my job. I took some money out of the bank, and I drove to he was in Beverly Hills or Hollywood, one of those cities there, and I got a motel room. And Monday morning, and I went down at 6 o'clock and sat on the front steps. I wanted to get in his therapy. I thought, this is going to straighten my life out, and of course he rejected me. And I drove back to Canton and was working in a boutique store, and a fellow named Phil Frana. I owe Phil Frana an eternal debt because he came in one day and he had told me about Rose and given me his book. But once I saw Janov's book, I said, I don't know what Rose is talking about. But Phil came in again and said Rose was talking in Kent. Can I put this poster in the window? I said, sure. And as it turns out, I went to that talk. And it was at Kent State University main campus.
And would you say that at that point in time you were on a spiritual search,
No.
or was it more?
Never. Actually, in retrospect, I realized I was very rarely on a spiritual search. I wanted to be free of suffering. I was miserable, and there's about 12 reasons, none of which I really want to go into any great detail. But I was one of 6 kids, second in the birth order. My father was abusive. Any way you can name any kind of abuse. My father was an expert at it all, and my older brother joined in, and it was just all I wanted to do was. Uh, I don't know what I wanted, but I didn't want to be in the state that I was in. And when I went to that lecture for Rose, I actually was recovering from a rather traumatic event, and the room had about 100 people in it, and maybe 25 of whom were standing at the back, and it was. I ended up sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. I couldn't even see him. But to this day, I can still hear the tone of his voice. And the first thing I ever heard him say was, does the man own the house or does the house own the man? And there have been other people that said, like a bell went off in their head or something like that when they heard Rose say something. Well, as soon as I heard his voice, something changed in me. And I knew, I just intuitively knew I've always been sensitive and not too smart, but pretty sensitive. And after the talk, I signed my name on a piece of paper and ended up going down to see him with Phil Frana. But I just knew that in some way that this man would be able to help me.
I understand that there were student groups, of course, that met and discussed Richard Rose's work and worked, applied his advice and so forth. Did you, after the talk, go to a student group for a while and then go see Mr. Rose, or did you just right away go to his house and check him out further?
What happened was Phil Frana, before, there was no group in Kent State at the time. At that time in '73, I think there was a group in Pittsburgh, but there was no other group. And so Phil called me and he said, "I'm going down to see Rose on Saturday. Do you want to come along?" And I said, "I would. Yeah, you betcha." And so we drove from Canton. It's about 120 miles down to a little town on the Ohio River called Benwood, West Virginia. And I had no idea. I hadn't, I didn't have any. I had read one book by Krishnamurti. I will say that. Think on these things. And I thought that was an amazing point of view, the way he talked about being in the world, being present to experience and stuff like that. But there was nobody I could talk to about it. So, I mean, that was my only experience with, let's call it esoteric or spiritual work. So Phil and I drove down there Saturday morning, and we went up these steps. It was an old house, two-story house on a little hill across from a school, which was right next to the river, and it was poor. It was a poor area. Very poverty stricken, but Rose met us at the back door, like, big smile, a handshake. Yeah, come on in, we sat there, and I don't, in the kitchen was, oilcloth tablecloths on two old Formica tables with a Royal typewriter in the middle of it, and dishes piled, just an ordinary kitchen. And I think we spent half the day there talking, and I have no idea what he talked about, and I have no recollection of anything, but I know when I went back to Ohio, there was a small group of people who had been at the talk. I don't know if I should mention names. I could, but there were about 5 of us, and we rented an old house on the outskirts of Kent, and that was the first Kent ashram. And I moved at the time I was staying at my parents' house because I'd moved out of a farmhouse I'd been living in. It was full of drugs and, wrong influences. So I moved into the ashram in Kent. Yeah. It was, and we had meetings. We had, as a matter of fact, you probably know one Steve Harnish. I believe Steve Harnish was the first Kent monitor. And we had weekly meetings and posters we made on. it's nothing like it is today, and the posters that we made by using magic marker on typing paper and go around the campus and stick them up, and um, that's how it all began for me, just being involved in helping, being part of a group and helping that group to function. That's how Rose used to say it.
Did you ever have the thought of, what am I doing getting involved in this? This is kind of crazy, or did
No,
you just kind of leap in and sense that
no.
this is the thing that I need to be doing?
I had I had nothing left, See, there wasn't really. I
Hmm.
mean, this was the last my last chance. Is really the way I felt about it. I had been so down and so close to extinction. It was either this or die, and I had no idea what Rose was really talking about. But I was I became, I was emotionally attached to him in a way that, I have found out many years later. I was a devotee. I was not a disciple, meaning I wasn't really I didn't have a philosophical mind. I'm a very emotional person. I was, and I still am. And so I just knew, and I was attracted to him, his charisma, his compassion, uh, his sense of humor, his very common, he wasn't, uh, he didn't have any pretense about him. And after I talked to three or four psychologists and a psychiatrist, and like coming from Janov's place, these people were arrogant as hell. But there was nothing like that about Rose. But he had a presence in person that was, I mean, it just affected me. And he always discouraged people from being devoted to him. He could be crude. And if he decided to, if you got on his wrong side, it was the paint would peel off the walls. I can tell you that much. But I just loved him. That's because my own father was intolerable. See, he was. So
Hmm.
Rose became a father figure for me. That's really what happened. You know. So,
Hmm.
uh, but gradually as time went on, I bought the book. I did what he told me to do. I did what he said we should do because we were all a bunch of, I would say most of us were. I don't want to put people in there, but we were kind of burned out hippies, the first group. And Rose had said that he had a window of opportunity, or there was a window of opportunity for him to talk because people's heads had been opened up with acid, and yeah, that was me. See, and so it was very humble beginnings. And he said, read this book. And the first book was 8.5 by 11, typed out on old Royal typewriters, stapled together, and then put with what do you call it? Duct tape on the edge. The Albogen papers. There were two halves to it, and it kind of went like that. And if he would come up about once a month to visit, and give a talk, and he'd come to the student union and sit in on the meeting, and of course things were always electric when he was there. Yeah, it was funny sometimes.
What sort of things did he have you all doing? Like, I know you were
Hmm.
having meetings.
Hmm.
Was there, did he give guidance on what the meeting should be like, or topics, or
Uh,
those sorts of things?
yeah, in the early days he did. Um, Matter of fact, there was something that I think Augie Torak wrote the Monitor papers, but there were supposed to be. And one thing about Rose is he had his way of doing things, and that's the way you did them. Yeah, because well, we didn't know what we were doing otherwise. So it was basically a blueprint. I'd always worked as a carpenter, so blueprints are heaven because you're out there, and if you don't know what to do, you go look at the print. That's what you do. But what he really did initially with everyone: stop drinking, stop smoking, no drugs, and be celibate. This is it. This is, here, you want to do something? Here, do those things. Get your head on straight is what he called it. Get your life, you couldn't, we were to be the laboratory. This was not here's a whole bunch of stuff. I want you to learn these terms. It wasn't like college. I mean, he was the most amazing, I'll call him a teacher. I mean, I had a lot of teachers, I had 3 years of college, but he was not that kind of teacher. This was a experiment with your life and the way you were to be in the world. And he'd say, I'm trying to age a few young people. And so we all, there was no booze and no dope in the house. I mean, if anybody was, that would be the end of you. You really kind of had to follow the rules. And it served everybody well, really, to clean our acts up. But the meetings would be on a topic, like the monitor. There was one guy called the monitor, and then in this case it was Steve Harnish. He's still a great monitor today, and the monitor was not to be confronted. Rose had a system. He actually had a system. He called it the Albigen system, and that was his blueprint for, let's say, becoming a spiritual seeker, or how to go about it, And so the monitor might ask everyone in the room the same question, like, "What do you know for sure?" And people would give their answers and go, and then the other people in the room, at the time you had to volunteer to be confronted, or else you could not confront. But other people in the room would ask you questions about what you said, with the intent to reflect to you your thinking, or maybe errors in your thinking. That's how it went. So that was the beginning. That was all. We all began at the same place, really.
You mentioned celibacy, which is probably projecting upon the audience. I can hear people saying, "Yeah, that makes sense. No drugs. It sort of makes sense. No booze.
Yeah.
But this celibacy thing,
never a popular
what's up
topic.
with that?"
Yeah. Well, never a popular topic. And certainly less so today than back then. But Rose was, see, today there's so many people out there and they call it energetics or whatever. But Rose he had spent his whole lifetime he wanted to know God when he was young, 4 or 5 years old. Or, he was from a Catholic family. Always in a Catholic family, there's one that's going to be a priest, and he was the one. And for what it's worth, for a while I was the one in my family, but that didn't work out. But in any event, he had no teachers, and what he discovered was, and what he put in his Albigen system, and like the idea of celibacy, he realized that all your energy had to be directed at one thing. You couldn't, like he told me, Kasari, you can't ride 2 horses. You can't. And the whole idea of celibacy, what is the major energy source in any animal or any living creature, even a tree, is to stay alive. And then after that, well, reproduction. That's it. Those are the 2 big energy things. And so his idea was, part of the idea of celibacy is to take the energy from that you would normally expend. And it was not that sex was a sin or anything like that. It could be detrimental to your health physically, and it could also be very detrimental to your health psychically or psychologically. But it was not a sin. And he said celibacy is a tool. And me being a carpenter, I had tools, see, and I understood. This is what I loved about him. His language was so plain. I never heard him once and I knew him for 40 years. He never once said the word satsang, and I'm so thankful for that. See, he just talked. He was at West Virginia, and he said his own description. I'm a fat-headed, arrogant bastard. I'm a West Virginia hillbilly that looks like Burl Ives with the mange. I mean, he had that way of saying things that just hit the nail on the head, and you didn't have to have a college degree to understand it. I don't know how many times I heard him say, anybody can find this answer. If you work in a steel mill, it doesn't matter. See, and if you hang around psychologists and those kind of people, you get the feeling that, oh, they're smart and you're dumb. See, but it wasn't that way with Rose, So the idea of celibacy was to conserve your energy, and he would advise people. He never gave blanket prescriptions. Like celibacy for one person would be different. Like if a person, had 3 girlfriends, celibacy for him might be dropping 2 of them. But if a person had one girlfriend and they only saw each other once a week, well, then maybe how about seeing each other once a month? He would, he personalized things because after he met a person and you talked to him, he would know you. He could know you really in a heartbeat. He had this amazing ability. But so you take that energy and then you begin to do the mental or reading. He was big on reading. These are books you can read. And not just his books. Ouspensky was real popular, the Fourth Way back then. And Conquest of Illusion. It took me years to get through Conquest of Illusion, and it's just this little tiny book. But I just couldn't get my head around it. But eventually, I did. Eventually, I understood what he was talking about. So that's, and I don't know if people today have any interest in celibacy or not, but I can tell you what it did for me and for the other people in the group. And you fall, and it just matters if. Just get up one more time, then you fall. That's all. You just keep putting this is Rose. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Do what's in front of you. If you throw enough mud at the ceiling, some of it'll stick. I mean, he had these, he was a contractor, so he spoke a lot about things that he learned contracting, like some of the laws in the law of the contractors. One of them, work with other people. That's why the group, So, yes, celibacy can really be a tool. If it can hurt you too, if you're not careful. The male can get, you can have prostate trouble if you don't do. Celibacy is actually not just. There's no physical repression. You have to learn to turn your mind away from it. Turn your, what he used to call, internal head. You can't think about sex and then not, because thoughts inspire glands and glands inspire thoughts, and so it's a circle. So there is a science to it, but he was always remained throughout his life big on that. That if you really want to make spiritual progress, you'll try it. You'll do the experiment. You'll make yourself the laboratory.
Mentioning celibacy brings up the question for me of what for you was most challenging about either his teachings or his system or working with him, and what were your particular challenges?
See, I didn't have, to quote a little bit of Gurdjieff, there's instinctive man and also instinctive people. Okay, I don't want to leave anyone out. And emotional people, and then intellectual people, and then philosophic people. Those are Gurdjieff's breaks down. And I was emotional, but Rose's path, if you want to call it that, was geared more toward the intellectual / philosophical person. And my biggest obstacle was, he said it to me once, I can still hear him say that. He said, when you begin to understand what we're doing, I'd only been around for like 2 years, and he said that, see, so that was confrontation for me. Um, but as far as, personally with him, he would give me stuff to do. Uh, like he said, hey, Kasari, why don't you go out and sell a few books? Because he had, over the years he wrote a few more books, and then he republished books like Magic, White and Black, Santinelli, The Law of Hypnosis, Law of Suggestion, I believe that was the name of it, and a number of other books that he carried. He bought Conquest of Illusion in bulk from the publisher, and so, and I was a very introverted person. And I still am, but I couldn't even go to the big meetings at the farm. We had meetings 4 times a year, as a matter of fact. I mean, for the first year, I sat outside. I couldn't go in a room with all the people. I was just that shy. But then he'd say, why don't you go out and sell books? And it's like, you got to be kidding me, Mr. Rose, And then to make it worse, see, the book industry used to be a standard 40% discount. Everything was standard. No, Rose's discount was 38%, and it was he. And he wrote it up on a card. I still have some of these cards somewhere if I ever get my possessions back. He had a particular handwriting. He'd always write on like pieces of cardboard that came out of a shirt or something. He never wasted anything, and so I did. Just doing some of the, and if you took a commitment on, you couldn't do anything else until you either finish the job, or if you finished the job and you wanted to go to do a little more, you had to find somebody to take your old job. Like putting up posters, for instance. If you graduated from that, you couldn't just say, I'm done, I'll go set up a talk. No, who are you going to get to do the postering you used to do? So he was always, the hardest part for me was the group work, which meant I had to interact with people. That was very difficult for me. Yeah, but I would say that was my biggest obstacle. And then basically just trying to graduate just from being an emotional person. I had a very, I was really attached to him, and I had a rapport with him as a result of that. And he was always he'd bust my chops because he didn't want people attached to him. And of course I was kind of a foolish young person too, and I could be the butt of a lot of jokes because I did a lot of stupid stuff, but I survived, I think.
And I just wanted to sidestep, if you will, for a moment. You
Sure,
mentioned if I ever
please.
get my possessions back,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
want people to have the impression that you're homeless on the
Oh,
sidewalk at the moment.
no. We moved from uh, Canton, Ohio, to San Diego. My big move, and because
Hmm.
Gail's a single parent. She has 2 grandchildren, and her son is a single parent, and they're 12 and 13, and so yeah, we came out here. But as it turns out, the company that we hired to move our goods was owned by the Russian mafia in Florida, and they had 13 shell companies in 9 states. And recently, they have been finally the federal, let's see, what is it, U.S. Attorney's Office. They arrested him, and there was a big to-do in the Southern District of Ohio, Cincinnati area. And they took the FBI seized possession of 7 warehouses, and some of these warehouses have hundreds of people. There's over 1,200 victims, and we're one of them. So we don't
Wow.
have our stuff. All of our stuff
Wow.
is in a warehouse in Cincinnati, and until the Department of Justice sees fit, we can't get it. And just as recently as 2 days ago, we were interviewed again by a television station. We've been on Good Morning America, but no, we're not destitute. We just don't have anything we own. I am sitting on a chair, but we're sleeping on the floor. I'm learning how to sleep on a futon mat. It's great.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Wow.
Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
good. You know, actually, what I was depressed for about 2 months. I mean, it's so devastating because all my books, you know, and
Yeah.
everything, all my the letters. I got some few letters from everything, clothes, all my tools, 50 years. So it's gone. And you know, people spiritual work talk about detachment, and then they go out and they get in a BMW and they drive down the road. I'll tell you what, you go home tomorrow and everything you own is gone except, well, we do have cars, computers, cell phones, and one suitcase. That's what we got.
Mm-hmm.
I've been wearing this. Good thing in California you can get by with flip flops because I almost brought nothing because all you need is shorts, a t-shirt, and flip flops, right? Yeah, well, try living
Right.
in them for 2 months. So I've learned detachment, and detachment is, you know, it's part of the whole spiritual path because you know we're so attached to everything, and we think it's just ego we got to get rid of. No, try getting rid of what half of the stuff you think you need, and you'll get a new point of view on yourself. You know, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sorry.
And no, thanks for sharing that story.
Okay,
That's
yeah, you're
that's
welcome.
pretty
Yeah, it's
remarkable.
I know, and you know, we've met. There's so many people that are they're just. It's such a devastating thing, and if you want to project that out um, to okay, well, when your egos start to fall, I mean, it's all devastating as hell. And Rose could. I remember it. You know, I moved to Denver once. I don't know when it was back then, 1981, and oh, I set up a talk for him or something. But I'd come back to visit him, and I had a girlfriend. I always had a girlfriend, you know. We were in the kitchen, and I mean to tell you, he just chewed me out for spending more energy with my girlfriend than I did on running the group or whatever was going on. And I mean, losing an ego is really a devastating thing because you think it's you know. So uh, it's all good. It's all God.
Yeah, so you even though you describe yourself as a devotee of Richard Rose, it's not like you lived on his farm or something for 20 years.
No,
You
no.
actually, like as you say, you came and went
Hmm.
and had other things going on at the same
Oh
time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, he inspired the heck out of me, and I eventually went back to college when I was 39, and I got undergraduate degrees in philosophy and psychology, both of them with honors. And then I went to, you know, got a master's degree in psychology, and because I wanted to be a psychologist, because you know, I really, it's fair to say that um, being around Rose and interacting with Rose and the group, you know, because you got to deal with other people. And I lived on the farm off and on for. I built a cabin down there, and I lived there off and on for a week at a time. And I did a month's isolation one time, but um, I even got in a P. I wanted to be a psychologist because I said, "Damn, this guy's a real psychologist," and he always maintained that uh, the perfect psychology will lead to absolute truth. And he didn't go into the tremendous detail about it, but you know, if somebody wanted to get a book, The Psychology of the Observer um, is a small, a thin book. He called it a little book, but it was his psychological system. And if you can pick up what's in there, you know, you can retraverse the projected ray of your individuality. And you have to go through your psychology. You really can't ignore it, you know, because if you sit in meditation 10 hours a day and you know you're dialing bliss, but you go down to work and your boss gives you a hard time and you pop a gasket, well, what, you know, uh, that's not necessarily that you've changed your being. And his system was about change through action. I guess I could say it like that. You change through action and determination, you know. You had to be determined to do things. And so we all had jobs. But if you lived at the farm, you didn't have to work. You know, he didn't demand it. He said the farm is an ashram. You can come down and meditate out in the woods, pitch a tent, build a cabin, whatever you want to do. But most of the guys down there, you know, we'd cut firewood and build roads and you know, cut brush. We had goats. And I mean, it was West Virginia country living, with a benefit. And the benefit was, you know, we'd have meetings and group meditation. And Rose was he was such a live wire, you know. He was always there, and he always had something for you to do. I can tell you that. You were never bored. If you wanted something to do, he'd give you something.
Now, I know I mean, obviously you spent a lot of time with him. Did you ever get a sense of there's Rose, the spiritual teacher, but then there's Rose, the ordinary guy? I mean, was there ever that sense of what he was like, you know, hanging out in the living room or something?
I mean, I traveled with him a couple times back and forth across the country. And you know, when we were there in Moundsville, the farm was up outside of Benwood, you know, up on top of a hill, the mountain there. It's Moundsville, West Virginia address. But say, Kasari, come on in for dinner tonight, you know. Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I'd go in and there'd be two 98-cent TV dinners there. But it was having dinner with Rose, and we would just, let's go to Arthur Treacher's and get us fish sandwich, you know. And so I did a lot of stuff like that with him. Come on, let's go get some groceries, you know, and go to the grocery store with him. And I had one particular experience on the way because he would drive all across town to save 10 cents a pound on bananas, you know. He'd go to 4 different grocery stores, and he was because he grew up in the Depression, and heck, his parents put him in a orphanage, a Catholic orphanage, because they didn't have enough money to feed him. I mean, so he knew the value of a nickel, I'll tell you. And no matter where you were with him, there was no distinction between Rose the man and Rose the teacher. Rose the man was a teacher. I mean, he had made that commitment early on, because when he was looking, he traveled all across the country. You know, he came out here to Yogananda's place, and if he heard about a book somewhere, you know, to get Eliphas Levi, I forget how far he had to go by bus, because he heard there might be a copy at some little bookstore. And he said the guy actually went down. He said he opened a trap door in the floor and went down in the basement and brought it up, you know. So, but the whole idea was to he couldn't find anybody who didn't want money or sex or power or fame, and he said he never really started to move until he made a vocal commitment, meaning my understanding of a vocal commitment is you say it out loud to your greater self or God, or however you want to put it, that if I ever find anything, I'll make it available, and for free. I think I don't know if I'm adding that or he added that, but I never even bought him a hamburger. He wouldn't let me buy him a hamburger. I ate at his house 100 times if I ate there once, and he never let me buy him a hamburger. I mean, that's a little bit different than what happens today. You know, these guys have there's a guy right now, my wife's involved getting in she signed up for a seminar. He's going to bring in about $3.5 million in a week. The number of people that have signed up for the online and everything else, you know, and I mean, it just astounds me, you know. But Rose had certain attitudes. You can't mix money and spirituality, you know. You know, if you can't you have to tell the truth in relative things. Otherwise, you have to make of yourself a truth machine in a way. If you can't tell the truth in little things, how are you going to recognize truth in big things? You know, stuff like that. And they were, I think, I think people today, I think there's two kinds of people today. Those that would ridicule him for being uh, unsophisticated, but that was by design. He had the greatest vocabulary. I always had to have a dictionary whenever I read anything. He used words in such subtle ways, subtle shades of meaning. Um, and then there's people who really appreciate his directness, or could, if they're, but he never really was not big. He did not care if 5 people came to a meeting or 50. He said, if you're here because you're supposed to be here, and I deal with people, I talk to people that walk through the door, you know. Uh, and I can give you one little anecdote that really struck me strange, as far as was there Rose the man and Rose the teacher. Uh, I heard him say, I don't know if it was to me, it was to somebody, I'm willing to sacrifice your good opinion of me to tell you the truth.
Hmm.
See, and that's all. That's profound, because most people today don't want to offend anybody, and but the other thing was, if I'm at an intensive that was a 30-day intensive out at the farm in the dead of winter in February, coldest winter in history out there for a while. Went 17 below, but there were about 25 people, and oh, it was rigorous. You paired up. You had a partner. You didn't go anywhere without your partner in case froze to death or something or whatever. And uh, there was no meat and no coffee, no cigarettes, and some guys had to leave because they couldn't stop. They gotta have that coffee and cigarette. But and then you'd get duties. Like in some for a couple days. Okay, it's my turn to wash the dishes. And you had to wash the dishes according to a certain formula out at the farm because he was concerned about, people getting sick, if you don't wash the dishes. And then you had to clean up the floors with the rag, and then he was waiting on me and he was standing there, and I asked him a question. I said, during that meeting today, do you remember when Larry was talking about that line in the Psychology Observer, and he was standing right there next to Larry, and I saw his eyes light up when Larry said whatever it was he'd said, and then he looked at me after Larry said it, so there was a connection made right there, and I said, "Did you catch that? What Larry said? What'd you think of that?" And he looked up and he said, "No, I missed that." And I looked up at him and I said, "Mr. Rose, you never miss anything." And he said, "It's part of the old man act." See, and that told me something about him. That uh, see, being an old man. I mean, he literally was an old man. But what spoke to me there was, Rose the consciousness absolute, if you want to say it that way. It's part of the old man act. You have to play your part, whatever role you find yourself thrust into in life, whether it's street sweeper or a CEO of a big company. You have to play your role, but you have to know that it's a role. So in that sense, see, I'm down wiping the floor, and he's leaning against the door jamb, and everybody's waiting on me to start the evening meeting at the intensive, and yet this little comment, it's stuck with me for 35 years. See, he was always, there was no distinction between Rose the man and Rose the teacher, to answer your question directly. None at all.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It kind of leads me into another area. We've talked about a little bit about Rose's advice to people in terms of practical things that you can do, and and definitely he had an emphasis on doing things and cleaning up one's life and staying focused and conserving one's energy and directing it profitably, as he would say. There's another side, I think, or another aspect of Rose, and that's an almost mystical side to him.
Yeah.
Obviously he wrote a book called The Direct Mind Experience, and I was hoping to touch a little bit upon that. In that it seems to me that a lot or quite a bit of Rose's accomplishments or the ways that he helped people involved what he called stepping inside the head of another person.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that perhaps you could, what does that mean? That's something I've been around people who've been around Rose for many years, and step inside the head is just a phrase that comes up.
It's not a phrase. It's a real experience, and I can honestly say I was in rapport with him for years, and that I'll give you some examples in my own life. I was out there at the farm. I forget when it was, but I had a girlfriend. She lived in Kent, right, or Akron, and I've been down at the farm a couple weeks, and I remember Al Fitzpatrick said we were out down working, trying to, we were always constructing buildings for meetings, and this was the big pavilion down behind the house, and it was 50 feet wide and 100 feet long, all built with lumber and logs on the farm, and Fitzpatrick said all of a sudden Casari stopped and his head went up in the air, and then the next thing you know, he got in his car and he drove away. And so I went up to see my girlfriend. And, we got a picnic basket, and we went out into this big open country area on top of a big high hill, and the grass, I can still remember it. The grass was high and the wind was blowing it, and there was a big old tree up at the top of the hill, and you could see for miles. And, we had a picnic up there, put a blanket down, and everything. And so, I don't know, a week later, I go back, and I didn't tell Rose I was leaving, and I didn't communicate with anybody except my girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
So I go back down to the farm. Hey, Casari, how you doing? And I shook his hand. And, oh, you've been up on the hill under an apple tree with the redheaded girl, have you? And I was stunned. I mean, he described what I did, and I was 200 miles away. And I mean, I got chill. I could stick the chills telling you the story, because I said, Mr. Rose, how can you possibly know that? He said, sometimes I just know things. That's all. And I had so many things like that happen with him. And he called it betweenness. And there's a formula for betweenness. And part of the formula is you can't work betweenness like you work a sales plan, and you can't brag about it. And he always deferred when things would happen, and it happened around other people too, like just little strange things. He didn't take any credit for even, like, he'd look at a truck and he'd say, you're going to lose that tire soon, and one of the guys in the group, Mike Baldridge, had a roofing business, and he had a big dump truck, and sure enough, he's driving down the road that day and the tire falls off, or, and of course he was mad at Mr. Rose because he thought Mr. Rose made it happen, See, everybody thinks that you identify as an individual little mind. Well, I think the mystical aspect of Rose, and Rose was interested in this stuff. He truly was, and I got interested in it after I met him, really. He was truly a magus, but he didn't talk about it very much. And that was part of the formula. But, he could stop you. If he pointed at you, he could stop you in your tracks. I had a Kundalini experience, and I had a lot of energy there for a while, and I thought, so I went down. Called him on the phone, and Cece answered the phone, and this would have been about 1980, and I'd lived the life, I'd been celibate for almost 2 years, and I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I meditated every day and read the books. And I thought I was powerful, you know, and I'd hypnotized a few people, and just because I got interested in that, and I read the book that he recommended. He said, this is the book I learned to hypnotize from. You guys, he said, every psychologist, every guy in the group should learn how to hypnotize so you understand the human mind and how it projects, you know. So I did the things he recommended. And so I'm all, you know, I've got a quantum of energy, you know, and he says, yeah, come on down. And so we go down to the same old kitchen, the same old tablecloth, a yellow and white checkered oil tablecloth in the kitchen. And he's sitting across the table from me, and he's always, you know, we're telling jokes, and and I got this idea that I'm going to whirl around and I'm going to point at Rose between the, you know, you point at the third eye, you know, and you can kind of stop a person's head. And so I got this brilliant idea that I'm going to do that to Rose, right? And I whirled around and I pointed at him, and my hand, my finger, felt like it was on a watermelon seed, and I couldn't point at his forehead. It went off to the side. I swear to God, shoot me if I'm lying. And he laughed like hell. He says, try the other hand. And so I tried the other hand, and I could not point at his forehead. It was impossible. That's what happened. I'm telling you the truth. That's exactly what happened. And how in the hell, how it happened, I have no idea how it happened. But that was Rose, the Magus, at that point. And, you know, that may seem like a really, I don't know, stupid story, but, you know, Shakti, I met some other gurus I met a guru from a place called Jewel Heart. He was a Tibetan Lama. He's up in Ann Arbor. They have a very large organization. I did some remodeling in the house he was living in. That's how I met him. And then I went to a weekend intensive, and he put his hands around mine, and I, you know, 220 volts went through there. But, you know, that's how he got his students. But I already had a teacher, you know. But, you know, to get back to the point, Rose, if you think you're an individual mind, or if you know mind is everywhere and we're all one mind, well, you know, maybe you can, like Star Trek, open channel D, see? And you do it by a formula: to know, to will, to dare, and to be silent. And Rose lived these formulas. You know what you want, you will it to happen, you know, you dare, and then you don't talk about it. And ultimately, you can, you know, a person, see, I'm a believer in transmission. I don't think, he wrote a book, The Psychology of the Observer is a great book, but he also wrote a book called Energy Transmutation, Energy Transmutation, Betweenness and Transmission. And he talks about what they used to call in Zen, you know, separate transmission outside the scriptures, you know, no dependence on words and letters, direct pointing at the soul of man, and I forget the other one, but you know, that kind of thing happens on a construction site. You spend a month working with a journeyman. I watched a guy on YouTube today cut dovetails. I used to hand cut dovetails. It's a labor. I watched this guy do it. It's as easy as putting a fork to a piece of steak. You know, you learn by being, you can get a direct transmission from anybody if you can establish rapport, you know. And what's rapport? Well, it's getting into the head of the other person. How do you do that? Well, first of all, you no longer exist. And I think and Rose, he said stuff to me. He said, these guys don't come and talk to me. You know, he would say things to me. I think my relationship was different because due to my fractured mentality, call it that or whatever, but I had I did have a sensitivity. I still have some of it. And, but you know, you can't get into somebody else's head if you want to take your little self with you. No, it's just kind of and he said it one time. I'm so glad you're getting me to remember some of these things. He said, you just kind of let yourself ooze out. Say you're in a room, you're sitting in, and he also recommended sitting in rapport with yourself, which I never quite got that, but I know some people did, and it proved beneficial. But, as far as another person, if you want to have rapport with another person, letting yourself ooze out. Well, what oozes out? It's sure not your personality. You have to be able to, like, what was that guy's name? Edmund Husserl. I liked him. He was a German philosopher before Heidegger. He said you have to bracket this out. You have to leave yourself on a shelf. And so the idea of being able to get into someone's head, or, and he would express it, yeah, you got to walk a mile in somebody's moccasins, but it's the same thing. You just are secure enough. And I asked him one time, during the same sojourn, I stayed about a week when I went down and tried to point at his forehead. And we were in the grocery store, and I had this, what do you call it, insight or revelation. I said, Mr. Rose, I realized I could have any personality I want. And he said, yeah, that's true, but you better pick one and stick with it, So, but the thing is, personality and who we think we are, it's an act, it's a role. But if there's only one mind, getting into someone else's head means, there's no interference between the part of mind that comes through your physicality and the part of mind that comes through their physicality. And some gurus say it, everyone you look at is you. Well, yeah, but that's a capital Y-U, let's say, I know there's been many people in the early group, and there's some little videos made. One of the Rose's first students said this, and people say it proudly. He said, "I was sitting next to Rose. And I knew if I looked at him, I'd see myself. I couldn't get myself to look at him, and I'm thinking, why the hell not? For God's sakes, isn't this what you want?" And many people, but it's a frightening thing, depending on the depth of your attachment to who you think you are, which in the final analysis you aren't, So, and that was Rose's real legacy, I think, except that the TAT group and the people in the group are his biggest part, a very visible and critical part of his legacy. But his other legacy was this idea of direct mind, really, and transmission, because I think it's happening now in the TAT group between people, that if you hang around somebody that's made the trip, and if you're, you connect, they call it heart connection. Now they have different names for it, but I'd rather hang around with somebody that made the trip than the local butcher, unless the local butcher's made the trip. Otherwise he's going to be talking about the fillies.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you got a master's in psychology, and
yep.
Were you also were you a licensed therapist?
Oh, well? Yeah. I was a licensed social worker, LSW in Ohio. You got to take a battery of tests, and I worked for 10 years as a therapist in group homes for adjudicated youth. I didn't work there 10 years, a number of years, at age 13 to 18. I also worked as a behavior specialist, which is designing behavior plans for incorrigible youth. Like I would go to meetings at the schools, and you have to design a plan. How are we going to get this kid to sit still and quit throwing books at people, or whatever it is? And I worked in Columbus, Ohio, at a very large center there. And I will tell you something. I learned psychology from Rose. I was in a PhD program at University of Nevada, and one of my professors was the guy that started this ACT therapy, ACT. I know him personally. I've been to parties in both of his houses, in Lake Tahoe and all that. They don't hold a candle to Rose as a psychologist, and I don't mind saying that publicly, because the way to change behavior is through and he said it in a poem somewhere once. I wish I knew remember what it was, but teacher is by circumstances that befall us. So he would create circumstances. Like Gurdjieff, Gurdjieff could write music, and he would say, this person is going to weep when they hear it, and they'd walk in and they'd start bawling, and they didn't even know why. Gurdjieff, and Rose thought Gurdjieff was the most brilliant psychologist in the Western world, but in my method, working with people, like with these young kids, I mean, these kids had a choice when they came to the group home: go to jail, or come to this group home, and they were some tough kids. And I had an office, and I had a 2-foot square mirror down between the desk and the wall, and these kids would come in, and I'd get them going, and they'd get mad as hell, and I'd whip that mirror up, and I'd say, look at yourself, and it would stop their heads. But then, like the principal of the school said, Mr. Casari, where did you get your training? Because I didn't follow the appropriate way, and I hate that word appropriate. I'll tell you what, they should strike that from the English language. I didn't follow the appropriate accepted methods for dealing with ADHD. And it's all medication too, the whole thing with Big Pharma and medication. But those methods that I learned from Rose and that Rose used with people worked. He could just, and that's because he knew people from the inside out, and he used to hypnotize people. He said we should all learn to hypnotize. That way you really understand the human mind, not by reading books, but by going there. And you first mind you go through is your own, So it really served me well as, in that, although I never did become a PhD because I walked out. I couldn't stand the social politics, and you know how it is on colleges these days, so I left.
So in your experience, stepping inside the head of another person, it's not something that you could have said, oh, this next student that's coming in, I'm going to step inside of the head of that person. It sounds like it's more of a stance or an allowing or opening yourself to the possibility that might happen.
Right. Well, not even that. No. I'll tell you, I was riding out west with Rose in the van one time. We were going to Arizona. And he was talking about sensitivity, and I got my little notebook, and I'm writing stuff down. And I said, oh, Mr. Rose, I'm trying to be more sensitive. He said, Casari, you have to allow yourself to be more sensitive. And that sentence changed my whole life. See, and so if you're meeting, like if I was meeting a kid, and Eckhart Tolle has a Power of Now. I don't think I ever read the book, but so a kid comes in, and your job, my commitment with the kids was I'm going to help these kids. And I got a couple letters out of all the kids I work with. I did get a couple letters from kids thanking me for changing their lives. It's nice to hear that. But the thing was, my commitment was, I wasn't trying to build a career. Everybody's trying to build a career, I wasn't trying to build a career. I got into psychology because I wanted to help someone psychologically because Rose had helped me. And this was my way of passing it on, see? And so if you want to, you only want to get rapport with people for one of two reasons: either to love them or to get something from them, or to dominate them, Rose would say. You would love them or dominate them. So, and that's an impersonal love, let's say, not a touchy-feely love or anything like that, or romantic love. So, if you want to get into another person's head, just leave yourself at the door. Take your shoes off and yourself and put them at the door, and go in with an attitude of you want to help. See? And he said, no matter how bad off you think you are, or no matter how uninformed you think you are, there's always somebody who can benefit from something that you can. He said you can refer them a book if nothing else. You know what I mean? And so, no matter who you meet, there's something that you can do for them if it's your attitude, not about stepping into their head, but it's an attitude of helping someone. You know that, and I think it's that attitude that carries the day. And in addition to leaving yourself completely out of it, you don't put yourself, like Rose talked about healing too, and he could, and I tried this, and I took away a few headaches and pain from a sprained ankle and a few little things, and you just leave yourself totally out of it. And I think that's the really hard thing for people to do, because we're so damn attached to these little Paul Hederman action figures. That's his word. We're so attached to the action figure, but the action figure is just that. It's a cartoon character, and a true rapport is essence in connection with essence, and but then there's always the issue of or the problem of understanding what just happened to you. You might walk out of a room and something happened, but what the hell just happened to me? But you find yourself traveling a little bit lighter, and something happened, and then maybe you can go back and, like Rose used to say, you got to dope that out. And he didn't mean smoky dope. He meant, that was an old expression. You got to figure it out, and that's why you want to read books on psychology for the inspiration. That's what it was all about, So. It's a very doable thing for anyone. And you can do it with the animals. I've worked with horses a number of times, as a groom on a Tennessee walking horse farm with 40 horses. And I did that job twice, 2 different places. And to this day, I love animals and animals love me, except birds. I've always find it hard to get rapport with birds. I don't know why, but anything else, anything with 4 legs, no problem. And they talk to me. But you can't have, number one, you can't think, oh, Jesus, this is crazy, But I used to live on a farm that we had donkeys, and one of them was called Big Boy. He was about 18 hands high, just a monster donkey. Tell you, when I got depressed or something or downed out about something in my life, I'd go out there, I'd take an apple with me, and I'd put my arm around his big dusty neck, and he's got eyes as big as golf balls, and we're in commune. It's like Rose on the horse that, he took out in a storm to try to find the cattle. He promised the horse he'd bring the horse back, and essence is essence, no matter what piece of protoplasm or material, so-called material, it comes through. Trees have essence. The secret life of plants, I guess, something like that. But essence recognizes essence, and that's what rapport really is.
Along that line, you wrote a piece called Richard Rose, the Man Who Was a Mirror, which I'll link to in the show notes. And there's a line in there which I had never heard Rose say anything like this before. He said, if you want direct mind, you have to avoid technology. Can you say some more, elaborate on that a little?
I can. Well, I'll give you an example. This is a mundane example. We can take it further. Once I got on my feet after being at the farm a while, and everything, I ended up having a crew. I was up in Canton. I started out as a carpenter's helper, but I got myself together, and I eventually had my own framing crew, and I'm framing new houses. So I had gas-powered compressors, I had nail guns, I had everything to go in when they drop a load, and there's the foundation, and boom, we put the house up. So down at the farm, we're building the pavilion, and if you ever saw it, it's behind the farmhouse. It's this 100-foot long building with solid board roof. And all the lumber was cut on the farm, and we took it to the sawmill and cut it. And so there's a whole bunch of guys down there. And Rose had guys sorting boards by width. And so I'm walking down, and I think I'm a hot shot, because I got a crew framing new houses. I said, Mr. Rose, I got my compressor, and the guys are struggling driving nails. See, the guys are struggling driving nails. You had to hold them with vice grips because most of them were rusty nails that had been straightened out on rainy days that Rose had picked up in houses that burned down and brought back in 5-gallon buckets. And when it was raining on the farm, what we did was straighten nails. See? So I said, Mr. Rose, I can bring my nail guns and my compressor, and we can nail these boards. And he kept ignoring me. See, he didn't even hear it because the value was in guys learning how to drive nails, learning how to do, D-O. So the technology of big spiker nail guns that you could shoot boom, 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 like that, no, one guy who can't wipe his own nose, maybe he, like I was when I first started because I was so burned out, the technology, anybody can push a nail gun into a board and shoot a nail. But to learn how to hold it, to be attentive to the moment, take that nail, put the vice grips on it, now hit it with a hammer and get it to go in. See, that would build something in that man. The technology would ruin it. So fast forward, if you want direct mind, you can, Joseph Sidoni did psychic experiments with the guys that went to the South Pole, and he had an incredible correspondence all over the world, and they didn't have cell phones. So they would decide to send messages at a certain time, but the messages are psychic messages or thought messages, Mm-hmm. And so the more we depend upon technology, the farther away we get from our essential self. They got 3D glasses now, or, these things you put on and you're in a world, but it's not this one. But I mean, it's enough of a dream world without insulating ourselves further by this exotic technology. And even, there's a lot of very successful authors who still write on yellow pad. Eckhart Tolle wrote Power of Now on yellow pads. He didn't use a word processor. So that's my take on that statement, that you go within yourself and find a way to do it. See, as opposed to the beauty of tech. Not that technology doesn't have its place, but if you're interested in developing in yourself the ability to step into somebody else's head, you do it. It's like Rose. How did he know I'd been under that apple tree, for God's sake? See, it was like he was always with me. And, by implication, I was always with him, but I was always playing catch up, and he did say one time, he said, the door is open, but you guys got to climb up to it. I'm not going to bother you, but the door is open. The door was always open in his head. And now what door? Well, the door to a memory of his experience. And, I kind of take issue with people that say today it's that, we always have been what we're looking for, and the eye that's looking out is the same eye that's looking in, or however it's said. And yet, at the same time, for some people in some places at some times, you can... Rose said to me once about another person, he said, I was the tunnel through which Cece saw. He was always liking to play on words, but if you get that. So another person can be a portal out of this limited dimension, let's say, or out of their limited identification with an independently existing individual consciousness, however you want to say it. Another person who's got a, and the thing is, that person's life, I mean, this is my own take on this. You build a vector by what you do, not by what you say. And Rose was big on the idea of building a vector away from untruth. And so at some point, there's a leap of faith, because you find out your intellect, it's been run up a rat hole. Now what? See? And then it becomes intuition, or it becomes intuitive after that. And so another person who's there, and you probably experienced this yourself, somebody gets in rapport with you, their eyes are going to get a little bit wider. See? And it's the same way my eyes got real wide today watching that video of that old man, 81 years old. He cut those dovetails so perfectly, so fast, and he was whistling Dixie while he was doing it. And I thought, oh my God, I never could have believed it, see? Mm-hmm. And so my eyes got wider, but that's a relative sense, and you just, as above, so below. And that's how it can happen. So I think that's one of the things that's possibly overlooked by the people who are carrying on the Rose's work today, is the idea of a transmission, a direct transmission of mind outside the scriptures, and the whole idea of direct mind, because he wrote a book about it, and so it was important to him, and it's important to me because I'm a devotee.
A couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Just by way of wrap up. If someone listened to this podcast and they said, I'd like to find out some more about Richard Rose, is there a book that you would direct them towards, or some other sort of research?
I'll tell you what. Well, there's the TAT Foundation website, TAT. If you type in TAT Richard Rose, you'll get there. Also, there's links on there. Steve Harnish has a website with just an amazing amount of information. But depending on the person, see, if a person's really emotional, I wouldn't necessarily recommend a first book be like the Albigen Papers or the Psychology, but I would recommend get Rose's poetry book, Carillon, Carillon, and it can be gotten from Rose Publications and probably through the TAT Society or the TAT Foundation. And just read the poetry out loud, see? And incidentally, in the back of the Albigen Papers, Rose's poem, 3 Books of the Absolute, that is an induction, just like Merrill Wolfe had an induction, which didn't do anything for me because I'm not intellectual. Merrill Wolfe was a different kind of guy. I had a different kind of head. But Rose's poem, The 3 Books of the Absolute, when, on a certain time, on a certain day, for a certain person, that'll open your head right up, depending. And let's see, but the Psychology of the Observer is his psychological system. I just recommend but I wanted to particularly highlight the Carillon for people who have a more emotional nature. If you started there, you might go further because you'll pick something up in some of those poems, Like he had one on friendship, which he wrote back in 1980 at that Winter Intensive. And I was the first person. He came out of the room and pulled it out of the typewriter, and he said, "Hey, Kasari, how about reading this?" So I was the first person to ever read it, Mm-hmm. And it's just it's kind of, it has a mystical feeling to it. Yeah.
Is there a final recommendation, perhaps, that you would make to people, or any advice that you?
I'll tell you what, I'd like to. Follow your fascinations. Never give up, and find somebody that you can help. Pass it on. See, whatever you learn today, somebody's still looking for it. But I wonder if you'd mind if I'd read this poem titled Friendship. It's only about a dozen lines.
Oh, that would be great. I'd love it.
Okay. All right. friendship. I passed through a deep crevice at twilight, and I saw a narrow vista of trees, magical in the mists, vocal to the hush of meaning, whispering to the wisdom of shades, of degrees, before the backdrop of eternity. And I had a friend whose dust with mine was not the bond, whose love with mine was not the bond, whose teaching to me was not the bond. Both of us had been to this same place, to the twilight in the narrow crevice, and because of this place, we are eternal. Richard Rose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it.
I have a couple more poems I'd like to read. The Call. A sail is on the sea, and evening's shadows drape its masts with mystery. The gloaming sad lights shape a quiet mad eternity. And for this sail a sea that storms my spirit through, on seas of memory, in lambent vesper hue. For this there burns a fire in me. A sail is on the sea, my spirit in its hold. Each eve I gather me its phantom crew of old, and ride the wide, immobile sea. The sail is on the sea, though waves unfalling stand, are hushed from rolling free, nor break upon the sand, but stand and whisper soft to me. A sail is on the sea, and shadows from it call, come lad and sail with me. Though painted on the wall, it cries, come lad and sail with me. Mr. Rose considered nostalgia the window to the soul, and a lot of his poems had that touch of nostalgia in them, or tinge. At least I found them so many, many times. This one is called The Poet's Dream. Soft is the nose of the wide-eyed fawn, soft somewhere in the forest deep. Far from the eyes that by beauty drawn, wonder now, did I dream asleep? Sweet was the dream as I dreamed of gold, and I dreamed that I ran for a chest, ran and awaked with a fever cold, lost by running the joy of my quest. Sweet was the vision so pure and fair, that escaped as I clasped her to me. Tender the vision that was not there, that I dreamed but was never to see. Old I am now, and now quickly fled, but immortally young is my dream. Leave it behind though I may, still red's the rose on the banks of the stream. Sweet is the lamb and my love is pure, sweet the face that my soul would caress. Sweet, but I know I will not be sure, and my spirit would hunger with less. And finally, the last one I'll read. Old Town Square. I want to go down to the old town square in autumn time, and sit with the old men in council there, without a dime, to hear the echoes of their brothers' feet that marched war, to know these bent forms long to brothers meet and march no more. No thought perturbs these men, 'tis shedding time, when leaves will fall, ambition's wings new feathers moult to climb as far the call. The drab old man who saw the fall of kings will not aspire who feels akin in calm to autumn sings no songs of fire. I want to go down to the old town square, for this is fall. I'll sit in the silence and wait and share, and that is all.